Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me as always, Brittany.
We have a wide-ranging conversation today, and I want to dive right in. I want to start with the files related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. And President Trump last week signed into law the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And this compels the Department of Justice to release everything that they have as it relates to Jeffrey Epstein within a 30-day time period since President Trump signed it. There are exceptions there, which we will get into. But to start off the conversation, you supported this legislation. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I am thankful that it finally came to the floor. The only reason it came to the floor is that Democrats, along with a handful of Republicans with a spine, forced it to the floor by signing a discharge petition to require the legislation to be considered, and that forced Speaker Johnson's hand, who had essentially prevented it from being able to go through the normal legislative process. That's revolting that was the way we had to get it to the floor, because there are over 1,000 victims of Jeffrey Epstein. These are women who were sexually assaulted as teenagers and even younger, and making sure that they get the justice that they deserve and that those files are released, as well as, frankly, making sure that we pass my Courtney Wild legislation to ensure that no victims can ever suffer the fate that these Epstein victims did by not even being informed about the sweetheart plea deal that the Acosta U.S. attorney negotiated and got an agreement for.
And you and I have talked about the Courtney Wild Act before that had bipartisan support.
Right.
The DOJ is now on the clock here after Trump signed this into law. They had 30 days from when he signed it to release these files. That brings it to December 19th. No later than can they release the files. What are you expecting to see in those documents?
Well, I'm sure that the Trump administration and the CEO of his vengeance law firm, Pam Bondi, will go right up into the last minute to release those files. That's right around Christmas, and that's so that they are buried under, the Christmas holiday crunch. I don't know what we'll see, but we'll finally be able to see more detail that sheds light on the fact that Donald Trump himself is the most mentioned individual over 1,000 times in the files that have been released from the Epstein estate. So I'm deeply concerned about not only what the president's potential involvement was here, and that there's a lot more there than he's alluded to, and in fact has likely lied about. But the bottom line is no matter what, we need to make sure that there is full light shed on what really happened here. And it is absolutely critical that this kind of sweetheart deal that he got, remember, this was a long time ago, and folks may not remember that Jeffrey Epstein, instead of facing federal felony charges, was able to get away with a sweetheart deal with state misdemeanor charges, and essentially was on house arrest and released to his own office every single day, and was still victimizing the survivors during that time. We can never allow that to happen again, and we always have to make sure in the future, by passing my Courtney Wild law, that victims always have the ability to weigh in court and to ask for annulment of sweetheart deals like this.
This legislation, like I said earlier, has a few exceptions. I want to talk about one of them. Materials can be withheld that, quote, would jeopardize an active federal investigation or ongoing prosecution. Does that concern you?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. Yes, I have really serious concerns that, if you remember, Trump, right before the bill passed through the Congress, he demanded Pam Bondi get a U.S. attorney to open an investigation, of course, against Democratic individuals. To me, it doesn't matter who the light is shed on. Whoever was involved in victimizing these young women, these teenagers, needs to be held accountable. But of course, he has hidden behind investigations again and again as to why the files couldn't be released. That if he uses that as a shield from the most sensitive documents, that will be unacceptable. But that's exactly what I expect him to do.
And is there anything Congress can do if you suspect the DOJ of shielding certain documents to implore them to release them?
Well, the House Oversight Committee issued a subpoena. Right now, Trump is already required through the subpoena that was issued by the House Oversight Committee to release all the files. He should be releasing all the files now. A law now specifically forces him to do that. So I expect and I'm confident that the House Oversight Committee will continue to press for files to be released, to use the tools that they have at their disposal to do that. But it would not surprise me at all as if Pam Bondi, who, like I said, is the CEO of Trump's private vengeance law firm, if she withholds files that really should be released.
And you are someone who has been speaking up against Jeffrey Epstein really for years now. And earlier this month, we have seen the House Oversight Committee release a slew of emails and documents related to Jeffrey Epstein through the Epstein estate. And in these documents, a lot of powerful people were mentioned. One of them was your colleague, U.S. Delegate Stacey Plaskett, and her text messages between Epstein and her were released. One was during a congressional hearing. Michael Cohen, Trump's former attorney and fixer, was testifying, and she initiated the conversation with Epstein. Epstein eventually pointed out that Cohen brought up for the former assistant of Trump, Rona Graff. Minutes later, Plaskett then asked about that in the congressional hearing. What's your reaction to learning about that?
That it is all distraction from the main issue, and that is Donald Trump has refused to comply with the subpoena from the House Oversight Committee for months. All the files need to be released. Light needs to be shed, full sunlight needs to be shed on how and who victimized these, aided and abetted and led by Jeffrey Epstein, how and who victimized these teenagers, and ensuring that there is justice brought to ensure that it can never happen again. An email exchange, while certainly less than appropriate, is not really the main issue here. The main issue is that Donald Trump hasn't released the files and he's not complying with the subpoena and now a federal law that requires him to.
Have you talked with her at all? I mean, I know you said that this was less than appropriate, but looking at that, it was during a congressional hearing.
Yeah, I was on the committee at the time as well, and I was in that hearing. And there were people that were, likely bombarding all of the committee members, recommending and suggesting questions.
But were those people convicted sex offenders?
Who an individual member was exchanging text messages with pales in comparison to the fact that Donald Trump refuses to release these files that he is required under federal subpoena to release. His attorney general is acting as his private lawyer, protecting him and continuing to help victimize the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's heinous crimes. It would not surprise me if down the road he actually commutes the sentence of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's groomer. I mean, these are the very serious issues. That issue of who one of my colleagues was texting during a committee hearing is nothing more than a distraction from the fact that the full files need to be released. Donald Trump is required to release them, and we will relentlessly pursue ensuring that these survivors get justice.
I just do want to get back to that, though. Just one more question about that, because you look at all of these messages throughout the years that people had with Jeffrey Epstein. I've seen journalists corresponding with them. That made me deeply uncomfortable seeing a journalist. I have no problem calling out, hey, that's inappropriate, to be not only talking to a source like that, but talking to a source that's been convicted of a sex crime against a minor. Do you think then Democrats should call that out more, should be more firm in calling Stacey Plaskett out? Because are you losing any type of, leg in this fight when you say Donald Trump should not be friends with him? That's disgusting. But then Stacey Plaskett texting him, that pales in comparison here.
It does pale in comparison by a mile. There are 1,000 victims of Jeffrey Epstein. I have spoken to many of them, met with large groups of them many, many times. And their primary concern is making sure that they can continue to cast sunlight on what is in these files, be able to see them themselves, be able to finally get justice, some measure of justice, because the sweetheart deal made it so that they didn't actually have the ability to see him held truly accountable. And at the end of the day, we have to make sure that there are no women, no individuals that can ever be victimized like this again and not have an opportunity to express their concerns in court, hear what the proposed settlement would be if there is one, and not allow a settlement like this to happen ever again. So no, I'm on the list of things that is vast of things I'm concerned about. Who a colleague of mine was exchanging text with is near the bottom of the list of concerns.
And I'm curious, you introduced the Courtney Mild Reinforcing Crime Victims' Rights Act. What's next for that legislation, A? And B, between now and December 19th, the deadline for these documents to be released, what are you looking out for?
So what's next, hopefully, is that I can get the bill moving in the House Judiciary Committee. I went to the Member Day presentation hearing in the House Judiciary Committee last week, spoke about my Courtney Mild Crime Victims Restoration Act, then subsequently followed up on the House floor with Chairman Jim Jordan, asked him to take a look at the legislation. We have bipartisan support for it. My colleague, I have bipartisan. Thank you, Tim Burchett. My colleague Tim Burchett is my co-lead, my Republican colleague, and now Maria Salazar, my colleague from South Florida, also signed on to it. So we're building momentum. I think there's pretty significant agreement that we should never allow a sweetheart deal like this to happen again, and we need to continue to press for the files to be released. Donald Trump waiting to the last minute to release them, right at the Christmas holiday when I know he's thinking less people will be paying attention. These files have haunted him. If he has nothing to hide, he should have released them long ago. I think it's pretty clear there are things he doesn't want to come out.
And now let's just make a total left-hand turn here. I do want to pick your brain a little bit about Venezuela. The State Department designated Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro as the head of a foreign terrorist organization. And this comes as the United States military has been expanding in the region now for a couple of months. And since September, our military has struck multiple vessels in the Pacific and Caribbean, and that has killed at least 80 people. What do you make of all of this action?
So here, let me start. I'll boil it down to a kernel of fact here, and then we can broaden it out. I agree with the president's decision to designate that organization as a terrorist organization, and Maduro certainly heads it. But does it make any sense to you, or to people listening to this conversation, that if Donald Trump thinks that a cartel that Maduro heads is warrants terrorism designation, and he believes that situation is so dire in Venezuela with drugs coming out of Venezuela that he is engaged in extrajudicial killings with no evidence or due process of people, according to him, running drugs or running boats through the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean, and he's blowing them up with no due process. And he's moving our most significant military hardware alongside off the coast of Venezuela. Does it make any sense to you that he's taken away temporary protected status from 400,000 Venezuelans in the United States because they say conditions have improved? I mean, that is because he is talking out of both sides of his face. He cut a sweetheart deal with Maduro by letting him profit from oil sales, lifting sanctions in order for that to happen, so that he could deport more Venezuelans, which Maduro has agreed to, because there's multiple flights a week. Donald Trump does not, anyone that thinks that Donald Trump cares about democracy, which he hasn't even mentioned in Venezuela, should look at how little respect he has for democracy here in the United States.
I had a conversation with Senator Mark Warner. He is the top Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee. And honestly, I was left with more questions than answers after that conversation, because he is left with more questions than answers. He told me he couldn't confidently say that all of these strikes weren't about regime change. He couldn't confidently say that everyone who's been killed in these strikes is a narco terrorist or is somehow related to trafficking drugs. I mean, do you feel the same way? Do you have those questions that he has?
I do. I mean, first of all, Donald Trump keeps referencing Venezuela being a source of fentanyl, and that these boats he's targeting are supposedly targeting fentanyl, when fentanyl is coming out of Mexico. Uh, Not that I'm not concerned about people who running cocaine um, boats either, but and I certainly, by the way, would not be shedding tears if Maduro were gone. But at the end of the day, those votes being blown up are a distraction from the fact that Donald Trump is allowing Maduro to be propped up to stay in power because he's letting him profit from oil lease sales. He's lifted some sanctions, and he's doing that because he wants to get Maduro to take more and more deportations of otherwise law abiding people who fled Venezuela because of the danger there. And he's acknowledging that there's danger there because he's designated the cartel that Maduro heads as a terrorist organization.
And what do you think then? I mean, I asked Senator Warner straight up, is the United States going to war with Venezuela? And he couldn't confidently say no. That's what he told me. Do you think that because of this military buildup, because of what President Trump is saying, that the United States is headed to war with Venezuela?
It appears that they are preparing for that possibility. And I mean, if you look at how the American people feel, even people here in Florida, um, there is grave concern about the possibility of military action on the part of the United States in Venezuela. Regime change efforts have not gone well, particularly when in Latin America, when the United States has attempted that. Um, we need to make sure that there's a democratic transition in Venezuela. The rightful president of Venezuela is Edmundo Gonzalez. Maduro is illegally holding power there, and we need to ratchet up economic pressure, ratchet up sanctions, engage in diplomacy coupled with those sanctions, so that we cause him more economic pain and pressure, rather than bring a whole lot of our military might off the coast, extrajudicially kill people who we really don't know at the end of the day. I mean, really, are we going after catamarans here that are speeding across the oceans? This makes no sense. The thing that disturbs me the most is that Donald Trump, Brittany, has not even mentioned the importance of transitioning Venezuela to democracy. That is what's critically important. It's what Venezuelans voted for, and Maduro is illegally holding power, and we have tools at our disposal that we've abandoned so that Donald Trump can deport more Venezuelans back to a country that he says is too dangerous and has designated its leader as as the head of a terrorist organization.
And I do, before I let you go, I do just want to ask you about news from this past weekend. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who up until recently was one of President Trump's most staunch allies, she announced that she's resigning from Congress. And in part, she said that she talked about the fight for health care. And I want to read what she said. During the longest shutdown in our nation's history, I raged against my own speaker and my own party for refusing to proactively work diligently to pass a plan to save American health care and protect Americans from outrageous, overpriced, and unaffordable health insurance policies. What do you make of her resignation, A? And B, what do you make of her thoughts on healthcare there?
I agree with her thoughts on healthcare, and I'm glad that she came around as a result of her own children experiencing, the price hikes that are outrageous, that are coming from the expiration of the tax credits for the Affordable Care Act. The refusal of the Republicans, especially Mike Johnson, who just rejected the potential proposal that Donald Trump supposedly was considering, and says, Republicans in the House have no interest in extending the health care tax credits. I mean, that's breathtaking and outrageous, and I understand her frustration. What I don't understand is, her commentary that she's leaving because she doesn't want to endure a brutal primary and have to sort of fight back against the president, and then only to, I think she's right, have the election result in her serving in a Democratic majority. I will tell you, I have disagreed with presidents of my party, and strongly supported the position that I and my constituents believed in. And I would never let a president of the United States bully me out of a job that I loved and the privilege that you have of representing your people. I would imagine she feels like she knows her people, like I know my people, and I think it's sad and unfortunate and disappointing that she would. And I don't agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene on almost anything. In fact, I sponsored the resolution that removed her from her committees in her first term because of her appalling conduct. But I don't think that we have three co-equal branches of government. The legislative branch is an important one. No legislator should, cower in the corner and fade into oblivion by allowing themselves to be bullied by a president.
She is someone who's been described as a firebrand. She has made plenty of controversial commentary in the past. It seems like she is changing her tenor, her tone a bit. She's apologized for, her participation in what she described toxic politics. Do you think that the Democrat Party is big tent enough?
Democratic Party.
Do you think that the Democratic Party is big tent enough to welcome someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene in?
Marjorie Taylor Greene is certainly not suggesting that she wants to become a Democrat, but as someone who has always reached across the aisle, I file legislation with co-leads, co-Republican leads, whether I'm their co-lead or they're mine, all the time. And like I said, I don't agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene on anything, but she gave an opening to the possibility of being able to work with her in recent weeks, where there seemed to be none before, and then slammed the door shut when she said that she was going to resign. So, I was intrigued by the possibility of, exploring avenues that might have made it possible to work with someone who I was so polar opposite from, like I am with Tim Burchett, by the way. We don't agree on anything. We always joke about that. But we found a way to work together on some things, and that's the way the legislative process is supposed to work. But she doesn't appear to be willing to give that a chance.
Well, Congresswoman, I appreciate your time as always. And as we see movement in either of these subjects, I hope you can come back on, break it down with me.
Always.
Thank you so much, and happy Thanksgiving.
My pleasure. You too, Brittany. Thank you so much.